The Mazda RX-7 is an absolute legend. Its rotary power plant was unique, it was incredibly good to drive, it was fantastic to look at, its racing prowess was off the scale, and is one of the few JDM cars Dominic Toretto has ever driven. And yet, its successor, the RX-8, well, the same can't be said about that, unfortunately. So we're going to explain why I'm saying that, and why I think the people who actually believe that are partially wrong. Given Mazda's prolific use of the rotary engine, you'd probably think it's their own design. But the Wankel Rotary was designed by, if you didn't guess it by the terrible accent, a German engineer named Felix Wankel in 1924. After World War II, he started marketing this new engine, only for everyone on the block to completely dismiss it as a useless experiment and nothing more. Well, everyone except NSU and Mazda, who signed a joint partnership for rotary development in 1961, and it was actually NSU that launched the first rotary-powered vehicle with the Spider. Its 1-liter single-rotor engine made 54 horsepower and 58 torque, so it's not much, but A, it's 1961, B, the thing weighs just 1,500 pounds, and C, they got 50 horsepower from essentially a 1-liter combustion chamber. 60 years ago. That's freaking nuts. But since NSU doesn't exist anymore, we're talking about the RX-8, you can probably guess that Mazda took the rotary and ran with it to the finish line. Starting off with the 1967 Cosmo and evolving it into the 1978 RX-7. Simply put, the RX-7 is one of the best sports cars to ever come out of Japan. It is an icon, culminating in the Spirit R Type A. It was a lightweight, fabulous-looking, top-tier sports car with vented disc brakes, custom-built Recaro seats, a 5-speed gearbox thrown in for good measure. But more importantly, certainly for our case, it had the ultimate evolution of the road-going 13B engine. It had two 1.3-liter rotors with two turbochargers to make a more realistic, because that whole gentleman's agreement thing, 320 horsepower at least. It could do 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds and take a corner really, really well while doing it. It was peak rotary sports car, and the RX-7 was retired on a legendary high. But the rotary wasn't quite done yet. Based off the RX-01 concept car, they had a new project with a naturally aspirated 13B rotary engine, and Mazda had no idea it was being developed. You see, Mazda's budget was pretty tight, so after the RX-01 concept came out, the management directive was shifted to SUVs. But a small team worked late with a modified MX-5 chassis nicknamed the Cockroach car. And eventually, someone from the top floor noticed this skunkworks program working in behind the scenes, and with the support of Ford, they let him keep working. Under one condition. It had to be a 4-door. So this new sports car became a weird 4-seater coupe thing with a front mid-engine layout. The designers cleaned it up a bit by using old-fashioned suicide doors, but it was still a weird design to say the least. And even though it was handicapped by the 4 seats, Mazda's engineers didn't stop from making a good car. The engine layout, being behind the front axle but ahead of the driver, gave the RX-8 50-50 weight distribution. The suspension was double wishbones up front and multi-links on the back. And it had some pretty lightweight materials, including aluminum body panels and carbon fiber driveshaft, meaning the 4-seater coupe weighed just 3,000 pounds. Powering it was the new Renesis 1.3-liter naturally aspirated rotary engine, making anywhere from 191 to 238 horsepower depending on the trim level. And the most powerful of those trim levels revved to 9,000 RPM. It was a brilliant sports car. However, the engine was not brilliant. It wasn't just a letdown compared to the RX-7, it was a letdown in general. I mean, 232 horsepower wasn't bad, but it only made 159 torque. Now, the RX-7 got around this torque problem as inherent to the Rotary by using twin turbos, but in order to meet emission laws, the RX-8 was naturally aspirated, and it just had no acceleration. 0 to 60 of 6.2 seconds is woeful in a sports car, and that's just the start. The first issue was that the car didn't want to start. See, the starter motor wasn't powerful enough, so it took a few cranks to get the thing going, which meant you wore out the starter motor faster. The second issue was a much bigger one than a little starter motor. It had a tendency to catch on fire. See, a very common modification to do is to remove the coolant sensor since it doesn't work. But it also means that you couldn't tell when your car inevitably got a leak. And eventually the coolant was all gone and people found out why coolant was important in an engine. Now that's actually one of just several different ways that Uranus's engine could explode, and it actually led to a recall for the entire first generation. But it was a letdown. Huge. Because the RX-8 has the chassis and the suspension engineering on par with the best of them. It's a brilliant car to drive. But then there's the engine, which is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It's just a disaster. But even so, they did make quite a few special editions, some of which we will talk about. The first one was from Mazda Speed. They got their hands on the RX-8 since launch. So this one had new exhaust, new spark plugs, better brake pads, a better suspension system, and a new body kit. And that body kit did change quite a lot. For example, the front bumper was redesigned for more brake cooling, and it allowed new vents to be added to cool the oil more. ProDrive in the UK also got their hands on it for a UK-only special edition. Only 800 of these ProDrive RX-8s were built, and they featured custom Oz racing wheels, a functional rear wing to improve high-speed stability, and a lower ride height. It was then finished off with a new ProDrive labeled exhaust system. It's pretty cool. But my favorite is actually the slowest RX-8 ever built. You see, it used a multi-fuel 1.3-liter rotary engine, but instead of using E85 or diesel or corn syrup or whatever it is, the other fuel in this case was hydrogen. Granted, it only made 107 horsepower and did 0 to 60 in 10 seconds with a top speed of 106 miles an hour. But it did all that without electricity and without emissions except water, which is honestly pretty sick, all the way back in 2003. And I'm always a sucker for engineering, so yeah, it's slow, but it's different. I think it's awesome. The RX-8 got a refresh in 2008 to make the chassis more rigid, new gearing for faster acceleration, and some new catalytic converters to stop the engines from catching on fire, which is always a good thing. It also had a new technology, the electric metering oil pump, which was a third injector for a total of 6 lubricant injectors across the engine. And that makes the engine run more smoothly, also a very good thing. Improving that engine was the best thing they could possibly do, because then the RX-8 didn't suck. So this RX-8 with a fixed up engine was actually a pretty solid sports car. I know everybody still thinks of the RX-8 as an absolute train wreck, and the torque is still pretty pathetic even on a refresh. But at least it doesn't explode, and that means as long as you drive it smoothly, it behaves kind of like an S2000. You need to keep it high up in the rev range. Keep, flowing through the corners a priority. So it's a proper driver's car now. And Mazda Speed made another variant with new aero and racing seats. However, it never progressed past the concept stage for whatever reason. But then it goes an even better version, the Spirit R. Only 1,000 were sold in Japan, and it's the best RX-8 ever made. The weight fell to under 3,000 pounds with aluminum, magnesium, and carbon fiber construction. The air intake was redone, and so was that new oil system, and the exhaust was simplified and enlarged. Then BBS supplied lightweight forged aluminum wheels, while Recaro built another set of bright red racing seats. All this made the Spirit R among the fastest Mazdas ever built. 0 to 60 in just 5.7 seconds and a top speed of 170 miles an hour, which makes it even less believable that the Spirit R only has 232 horsepower I simply do not believe that in order to get 170 miles an hour out of 230 horsepower, you need a streamliner car, and while this car is very good, it's not a streamliner, and 5.7 seconds to 60 with 2,900 pounds is not doable, really, with 230 horsepower, you lying little Gietz Mazda. But still, it's a seriously impressive machine. It's what the RX-8 always should have been if it wasn't for that pitiful Renesas engine. And like the RX-7, the Spirit R, as great as it was, marked the end of RX-8 production when it failed a European emission test in 2012. And with that, the last of the Rotaries was finally dead. Until 2023. Mazda's MX-30 SUV got an electric variant that year with a range extender, an 830cc one-rotor engine making 74 horsepower. Is it anything more than a marketing gimmick? I doubt it, because, the engine is just too small for both a potential EV sports car later on, and it's, a rotary, which is not the most efficient thing in the world, which makes it sort of useless for a range extender. I can't help but think a 1 or 2 cylinder engine would have been a better choice for this. But who knows? The RX concept looks pretty sweet.